I was asked, what is the significance of Juneteenth and what it means to me personally? Honestly, when I first considered this question, I was like, really? Seriously? It means freedom. Like most African American families, my family was victimized by enslavement. My great-great-grandmother Alice was raped on a plantation in Tennessee by a white man. As a result of that rape, my great-grandfather George was born. Juneteenth is a celebration to commemorate June 19, 1865, when enslaved African Americans in Galveston Bay, Texas, were notified by the arrival of some 2,000 Union troops that they, along with the more than 250,000 other enslaved Black people in the state, were free by executive decree, the Emancipation Proclamation. Even though President Abraham Lincoln officially ended slavery on January 1st, 1863. Like me, you may be wondering why it took 2 years and 5 months for the news to reach the slaves in Texas. Well, in 1863, Confederate states were still in rebellion against the federal government and didn't recognize President Lincoln's authority, and many slaveholders didn't comply with the order until Union troops arrived to enforce it. So, as I reflect on all that has happened since June 19, 1865, it means so much more to me than freedom. It means that I must intentionally use my voice to honor my ancestors that fought so hard for me and my children to truly be free, as stated in the Emancipation Proclamation, that on the first day of January, in the year of our Lord, 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, shall be thenceforward and forever free. And the executive government of the United States, including the military and naval authority thereof, will recognize and maintain the freedom of such persons, and will do no act or acts to repress such persons or any of them in any efforts they may make for their actual freedom. It's June 19th, 2020, and we are still fighting for our right to be free.
For me, Juneteenth represents a huge portion of untold American history. Oftentimes we focus on July 4th as the day that the United States became independent from British control. But unfortunately, there were still at that time, it was still over 100 years before slaves became free when we had the Emancipation Proclamation signed. But in reality, it was another 2.5 years before the last slaves were informed that they were free. And so this day represents the technical freedom of my ancestors, of African Americans. However, even in today's society, we are still dealing with the lingering effects of the bondage that we endured during that time. So Juneteenth commemorates when 4 million slaves were freed, but sadly, this holiday is often only observed by Blacks or African Americans. But I think it should be acknowledged by all who believe that everyone deserves the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
When I think of Juneteenth and its significance to me personally, there's 3 words that come to mind. And those 3 words are pride, hope, and liberation. I'll start with hope. While as a nation, we still have so much work to do, that same hope and sense of desire for a better tomorrow that dates back 155 years ago on this special day, I too carry that sense of hope that our tomorrow as a nation will be vastly different than what we see today. I'm the beneficiary of my previous generation's hope, and with that, I carry the same level of hope for the generations to come. From a pride perspective, I carry a sense of pride as I am immensely proud of my history as a person of color. I'm also proud of the road that has been paved by the many individuals that have came before me, and that I'm having the opportunity that I have today because of those individuals. And liberation, that in itself, I am free. And while we may not always feel that we have the same sense and level of freedom, I think today, June 19th, is a day to really reflect and acknowledge that yes, we do have a level of freedom as a person. And for all of those reasons noted above, June 19th, 1865 served as a beacon for liberation, independence, and for true freedom. It's a day that shouldn't only be celebrated by African Americans, but should be celebrated as Americans. Because what this day does is it signifies a time in our history where there was a change. And we have that same opportunity today on June 19th, 2020, as we as a national office and many associations across the country are celebrating and recognizing this special day. That for me gives the level of hope that I spoke about earlier. And with that being said, happy Juneteenth.
I actually didn't learn about Juneteenth until a couple of years ago, which is embarrassing to say. But I think a lot of folks are similarly learning right now as well. And so for me, Juneteenth is just a reminder of how far we have to go in terms of, number one, how we educate our kids in schools about the generational impacts of slavery. Number two, the importance of candid and vulnerable dialogue about the very real and practical impacts of systematic racism and systems of oppression. And then number three, action. You know, it's important to educate and it's important to have dialogue, but it is a call to action. And so for me, if I say that I believe in equity and equality, then that means I have to actively find ways to help dismantle policies and processes that perpetuate these systems of racism and oppression, even if that comes at the expense of my own comfort and benefit.
When I think about Juneteenth, I think about the history of my country and certainly the history of my culture, Black America, and where my culture is right now and where my culture is going in the future. Juneteenth has a lot of significance, obviously an educational piece to it as well, with the freeing of the slaves and emancipation. There's also the celebration around it, which is great. Music festivals, great food, dancing, people coming together just to celebrate cultures. But I also look at Juneteenth moving toward the 21st century and looking at what's happening right now in our country and in our communities. And I don't think it's a coincidence that this celebration is happening right now. And I look at what people are doing in their communities and the country. I look at the peaceful protests. I look at the peaceful demonstrations, the fight for equality and for social justice. And that's important, not only for the one day that we celebrate Juneteenth, but also looking beyond that one day. And I look at Juneteenth as an opportunity to self-reflect. And I ask my question of how can I be a change agent in today's time? How can I help people who have influence that I don't have, or people who don't understand my culture, the shoes that I walk in and that others walk in? How can I help them understand and be influencers to help for a better society and a better world in the future? So again, Juneteenth has a lot of significance. It has a lot of history, but we also need to look at it beyond the one day and say, how can we keep the momentum going about equality and social justice?
Juneteenth to me is really all about education. I didn't grow up learning about this holiday. I only learned about it actually a few years ago. It's not part of our normal curriculum. It wasn't something that was celebrated anywhere I was from. And I think that's a testament to how little we have focused on slavery and racism as a country. We see the effects of slavery now in what's happening in the systemic racism that exists. And really, it's about education to be able to understand the lasting impacts of that huge scourge on our country so that we can remedy it now. As a white person, I think the time is now for getting comfortable being really uncomfortable. These are a lot of conversations that people have not had to have before. Some people are just awakening to the issues that we're seeing in the country, and they don't know what to do. And that's part of it. Feeling uncomfortable is part of taking the next step so that we can all improve together. I was really happy to see that the NCAA is taking Juneteenth off to recognize this holiday so that staff members can educate themselves and learn more about the history of slavery and racism. I think it's an important first step that we are taking as a company together. And I really hope that staff members will use this time to learn more and to figure out how they can be part of this change to better support their colleagues, their friends, family members, student athletes, and everyone in the membership.
So Juneteenth, of course, is a celebration of the ending of slavery because it was 2.5 years later after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation that slaves in Texas found out that we were free as a people. And so for me, Juneteenth not only means, again, the ending of slavery, but it also is a time that I remember the sacrifices that my ancestors made for me. I also remember the strength that my ancestors have as a people to be able to endure some of the most hard times that I think a person could ever imagine. The Juneteenth also, for me is a celebration to say how far we've come as a people and what we've overcome. But it's also a reminder, particularly with the recent racial injustices that we face, is that there's so far that we have to go in terms of our freedom. And so freedom is different this time in terms of not the freedom like my ancestors and slaves experienced, but the freedom to be able to be who you are and appreciated for who you are. The freedom to be able to not have your life threatened by the color of your skin. The freedom to have a seat at the table to make decisions. The freedom to be seen as a person who is valuable and who has talents and who contributes to the world and to their community. So this year for Juneteenth, I'm going to, again, give thanks to my ancestors for all they've done for me and to reflect on how far we've come as a people. And I'm also going to look to see what more do I need to do that I must do to help ensure that we have a different level of freedom as a Black community, and what I can do to make sure that the next generations hopefully don't have to experience some of the things that people in my generation and my parents' generation are experiencing. And to educate others really about Juneteenth and the significance of this day.
So initially when I was asked to share my thoughts on Juneteenth and what it means to me, I was a little hesitant to participate just simply from a place of ignorance, because this honestly wasn't really on my radar as an occasion until a couple years ago watching an episode of the TV show Atlanta. And if anyone has seen that, there's a white guy featured in that episode who performs slam poetry as part of the event. So for a couple of years, that's really kind of been what my understanding of Juneteenth has been and my perspective on it. But I think what makes it really meaningful now is number one, just the turmoil that we're in right now. There's a lot of social unrest, and this is actually this opportunity for us to be able to come together and observe a really meaningful event, an occasion from the end of the Civil War. And I think it's about an opportunity to educate ourselves on, kind of first of all, the missed history from growing up. I honestly, looking back, can't think, having gone through junior high, high school, college, of Juneteenth ever having come up. Everything about the Civil War was related to Appomattox Courthouse or the Emancipation Proclamation, which obviously occurred much earlier in the Civil War time frame. But the idea that an occasion that recognized the end of slavery in our country was not part of what I learned in history classes is really unsettling. And I think for me, the last week I spent listening to the 1619 podcast and using that as an opportunity to really kind of fill in those gaps of what my knowledge is of history in this country, particularly as it relates to the Black community and to slavery. And so thinking of tomorrow gives us a chance to come together and support the Black community and in a very meaningful way. As a family, we've looked for opportunities to be able to go downtown, engage in a lot of great programming that's available. We've kind of identified some different movies to watch, just things that we can do to be able to set aside time to educate ourselves on what this means, and then to really implement practices moving forward that help us to be more supportive of our Black community members and colleagues.
I will be very honest. Growing up as an African American in the Deep South in Alabama, I really didn't know a whole lot about what Juneteenth was. It wasn't really something that we celebrated in my family. It was something I think I had some familiarity, some knowledge I had heard of, but I really didn't know what it meant. It wasn't until I went to college at the University of Alabama, and I was a history minor, a bit of a history buff, that I started to look into what Juneteenth was really all about. And so my first real understanding of Juneteenth did not occur until probably I was in maybe 18 or 19 years old, because I'd always believed that slavery was ended with the Emancipation Proclamation by President Lincoln in 1863. I learned that Juneteenth actually really is what ended slavery, because there were still some, if you will, insurrection after the Emancipation Proclamation. So then Juneteenth had much greater significance to me once I really understood what it was about and what it really was designed to celebrate, which was really the ending of slavery as a result of cessation of hostilities in Texas in 1865. So it took on much greater significance to me. As the intervening years have passed, I've always thought about Juneteenth when it's celebrated, when it's recognized. Haven't always done a lot in terms of celebrating it myself, but have certainly observed it and have been cognizant of its significance and what it means. But as I think about it now, especially in the context of what's happened in the last several weeks, I have somewhat mixed emotions about it, because Juneteenth ended slavery, but in some respects, we're still dealing with the vestiges of slavery as a result of racism, police brutality, and many other societal ills that deal with racism. And so as I think about the future and what Juneteenth means to me now in the future, I'm hoping that in 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, that we will have moved beyond some of the very vexing and troubling issues that we're dealing with today, and that Juneteenth will truly be a point for all Americans to celebrate equality and fairness and equal opportunity, and not because you are an African American or you are descendants of slaves, but because you are an American and you believe in freedom and you believe in equal opportunity and you believe in fairness and equality for all people. That's my hope. I'm an optimistic person by nature, and so my hope is that in the years to come, we can all celebrate Juneteenth for the truly historic marking that it is, and really bringing our country together so that America can fulfill its true purpose of equality for everyone.
On Juneteenth, I will be reflecting on and thinking about the fact that on June 19th, 1865, finally, with a proclamation in Texas, all of our states had ended slavery. 2.5 years after President Abraham Lincoln had issued the Emancipation Proclamation. I will be thinking about the 4 million African Americans who were ensnared by the institution of slavery, and how our country continues to deal with the ramifications of that institution. The recent pervasive racial violence that our country is paying attention to in new ways is not new. It has been around for almost 400 years, and finally we are waking up. It is important that our Black family members, our friends, our colleagues, our Black communities hear us as allies who will act. They need to hear, I am listening, I hear you. I see you. I am your ally. An ally must be a verb, not a noun. It needs to mean action. And being an active ally means you are anti-racist. You are committing to intentional individual action to end racism. It means intervening in the systems and the policies and the laws that perpetuate racism throughout our society. And we see it in employment, in education, our judicial system, law enforcement, voting, healthcare, the list goes on. We must all come together as allies who are committed to action. So on Juneteenth, 2021, and into the future, we can say there has been meaningful and lasting change that has been made for racial justice.
Well, for me, Juneteenth is very special, and it's been special for some time. I first really experienced it when I was, growing up in high school, and then all through college, attended various Juneteenth events. It always struck me odd as, most people in the country didn't know what it was. On one hand, it's very refreshing and good to know that many people are focused in on Juneteenth now. On the other hand, it's kind of sad that it took the events that really have torn our country apart to really focus in and recognize Juneteenth and its historical significance. I remember growing up and hearing all about and celebrating the 4th of July, and then realizing that, my forefathers were not free. And the 4th of July really didn't impact, the life of my forefathers in any way as far as freedom. And so I've always really been in tune with Juneteenth. And as I said before, it's refreshing to really know that that more people are really tuning into it and focusing on its meaning. History is one of those things that's, through the eyes of whoever is writing the history book. And it's also refreshing to know that history is being looked at differently, that, there's more a total look at history. And that's a good thing, because we're a very diverse country, and many people have built this country into what it is today. And I'd like to end with a quote by Marcus Garvey on history. And he said, "A people without the knowledge of their past history, their origin, their culture is like a tree without roots." And I'm really happy that America is finally strengthening its roots.